Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTubers. This is Jerry Diamond with How to Get Out of Babylon. Reading A.T. Hagan's Not Lights Out. We interrupt this program. I'm thinking more about going back over that again. Don't catch. Oh, it's on the tablet. All right. So, section Endings and Beginnings. John was dreaming of taking a cruise to the Bahamas when Big Red's crowing in the hen house woke him up. "Why do roosters have to crow an hour and a half before dawn?" he mentally muttered to himself, and rolled over to go back to sleep. For a moment or two he lay still, trying to slip back into his dream, when the sound, or rather lack of it, that he should have been hearing brought him fully awake. He sat upright in bed and said, "It's not raining." Leaping out of bed, he ran to the window and threw it open. Sure enough, he could hear no rainfall, but water dripping from the eaves of the house. He ran into the living room in his drawers, then remembered Lisa and Heather, went back into the bedroom and wrapped himself in his housecoat, and went back out the front door to stand in the yard. Anne groggily stepped out onto the porch to say, "John, what on earth are you doing standing in the yard? It's 4:30 in the morning." He saw his father step out of the barn. John stood, face up to the sky. It was still cloudy and overcast. The stars were not to be seen, but no rain fell on him. "It's not raining, Anne. It's stopped. It's not raining," he shouted as he ran back up on the porch, grabbed his wife and swung her around and kissed her. They went down the steps and stood in the yard again as his father walked up. In minutes the entire house was awake and standing in the yard, looking up at the blackness overhead, rejoicing over the lack of rain. "Cool," Heather said, and squelched her toes in the wet grass with Melinda. "Thank God," Lisa said passionately. "These bike rides have really been getting hard to take." "Do you think it stopped for good?" Anne asked. "I mean, the impact-induced rain, is it ending?" John said, "Probably not. I expect it'll rain off and on for a while longer yet, until the last of the asteroid strike energy dissipates. But I think this is a sign that it's beginning to wind down. I wonder how much we've had since impact. Anyone heard lately? I missed the news last night." Robert replied, "I knew... News last night said we were supposed to top 72 inches total since the strike, sometime last night or this morning. I think I've had enough of standing in the mud, so I'm going in to fix a pot of coffee." Everyone had seen as much of nothing as they cared to, so they all went back inside and set about preparing breakfast 2 hours early, but no one wanted to go back to bed. Melinda asked, "Do you think we'll see the clouds break today? It'll be good to see the sun again. I've been feeling like a mushroom." Her father said, "I don't know, but it's a hopeful sign. Clouds have got to break up sooner or later." John and Robert went into the barn to put fresh bedding down and feed the goats. The chickens wouldn't come off their roost for another couple of hours yet, so they'd come back to put their scratch down after breakfast. They opened all the doors and windows into the barn to promote airflow. Even the animals seemed excited, with the younger goats bouncing off the walls. Literally. After breakfast, the 6 o'clock news came on, and the end of the rainfall was the lead story. The official Weather Service reading was for 72 3/4 inches of rain from the first day until the rain had stopped at just past 3 a.m. in Gainesville. But as expected, the forecast was for more rain in the late morning or early afternoon. The meteorologists did say they thought the worst of the impact-induced rainfall was over, and the sun was expected to put in its first appearance in weeks over the course of the next several days. Even the news that Hurricane Gustav had reached Category 3 and was turning northwest toward Florida Peninsula from its present location several hundred miles beyond the remains of the Bahamas did not diminish their brightened spirits. While Mel and Heather stayed behind to wash the breakfast dishes and mind the baby, the adults went outside to survey the garden. If the rains were going to ease up, it would be possible to work the soil once it had a chance to drain. Fortunately, the garden was on a slight rise, so the water ran off quickly. "We've got enough gasoline still that we shouldn't have any problems turning up the present garden area, and there's enough usable room that we should be able to just about triple it in size," John observed. "It's going to mean a lot of labor, but it'll greatly extend the food storage and maybe even give us enough to trade at the market. If we keep winter greens going, we'll be able to keep up egg production through the cold time, and they should fetch a good price. I didn't see but one other person trading eggs last weekend, and she sold out right quick." Robert bent down and picked up a handful of soil and examined it. After 6 feet of rain, we've probably had a serious loss of nutrients. Even with fertilizer, this fall's garden is likely not going to produce the way we'd expect. We'll need to expand, but we might not have as much to trade as we might think. Been reading your books, and they said something about increased levels of ultraviolet light after an impact event. We're going to need to find out what can take higher UV and what can't, so we don't waste our time, seed, fertilizer. John studied the blank gray sky for a moment and then said, well, the impact was smaller than the ones that were modeled, so maybe we won't have so much of a UV problem, but you're right. Somewhere I've got a list of crops that will withstand higher UV levels and those that won't. We'd better find it. I seem to recall the grains are okay, but some of the beans weren't. I suspect we'll get cold weather early this year, so we'd better be sure to plant cold-hardy crops as well. We've never grown oats before, but we've got a couple 100 pounds of whole oats in the feed cans. We should try out an acre or two. They'll grow through the winter and be ready for harvest about the time we want to put in the corn. I think we could even use them for winter grazing if we manage it carefully. Ann turned and looked in the workshop. We've had a lot of trouble with that rototiller last spring. Have you tried to crank it yet? No, John replied, not yet, but this time I made sure there was plenty of fuel stabilizer in it when I put it away. Probably out to sharpen the tines, too. It'll be a few days at least before the ground's dry enough to work, so we'll have plenty of time to get all the equipment running. Sure hope the pasture recovers. We're going to need all the grass growth we can get before frost to make the hay last. They were all walking toward the orchard when Melinda came running from the house. Daddy, she said out of breath, there's 3 soldiers at the gate in a Hummer, and they say they want to talk to you. Told you you'd want to read both chapters.